Lords of the Fallen, released October of 2023, available on PlayStation, Xbox, and PC platforms, retailing for $69.99 on Xbox and PlayStation, but only $59.99 on PC. Lords of the Fallen is a soulslike, and is the second game to be released under that title, the first being a not very good game in 2014. Thankfully, this version of Lords of the Fallen is considerably better. It is what could be termed a Dark Souls clone, having many similarities to that franchise, in terms of its gameplay, and its style, and even its method of storytelling. And it has that same thing where when you help an NPC get what they seemingly want, it will then go pretty poorly for that NPC, generally speaking. But what does it do to set itself apart? Well, that comes down to two things. Firstly, this game takes place between two worlds, the real world and the umbral world. When you are in the real world, you can see into the umbral world using your lamp. You can also use your lamp to enter the umbral world. And at times, you will need to do things in the umbral world to affect things in the real world, and sometimes you'll just have to go there because a bridge or platform exists in the umbral world and not in the real world. But there are two important facts about being in the umbral world. You are on a timer in that world, and if the timer gets to the end, it spawns a very nasty enemy that you probably won't be able to fight off. And once you are in the umbral world, it's not easy to get out of the umbral world. There are specific sites to go to in order to get back to the real world, as well as being able to do it at the game's checkpoints. And going into the umbral world comes with all kinds of consequences. Your hit points slowly corrupt, your healing items don't work as well, there are a lot more enemies. But it exists not just for you to progress and solve puzzles, it's also something of a second chance for you, because if you run out of hit points in the real world, you are then taken to the umbral world. And that will also happen during boss fights. The second major difference from Dark Souls is that you can't see item descriptions, at least not all of them when you first start the game. There are two stats you need to be concerned about to see item descriptions. Those being Radiance and Inferno. Some items require one of them, some items require the other. Radiance and Inferno are your caster stats, basically the equivalents of Faith and Intelligence. Thus, if you're looking to read all of the item descriptions, you are forced into playing a caster in this game, or playing through it multiple times, or possibly just doing a simply ridiculous amount of grinding. Regardless of which path you choose on that, I am not a fan of this mechanic, as it seems like little more than a way to pad out the game. There is, of course, something resembling a story here. You are with a church of some kind, trying to fix whatever exactly is wrong with the world right at this moment. This involves you going to 5 specific locations and using your lamp to cleanse them in some fashion. Although you have to go to these locations, you don't actually need to cleanse them if you don't want to. Of course, that will affect the ending. And regardless of what you decide to do with that, there will of course be a really big boss fight at the end. Boss fights are of course a pretty big part of this game, and they come in two varieties. You have your major boss fights, where generally you can summon an NPC helper, and you're fighting something that's truly unique. There are also lesser boss fights. In these, you're just fighting a souped-up version of a regular enemy. These are often used to introduce you to a new enemy type. These don't allow you to have a summoned helper, and some of these lesser boss fights are completely avoidable as they just serve as guards between shortcuts in the world. And as the game has fast travel from the very beginning, You don't necessarily need to unlock every shortcut. Speaking of fast travel, it is mostly between the game's equivalent of bonfires, looking like huge suits of armor that are slumped over. But you can at times make a temporary checkpoint. And while there are many places to put a temporary checkpoint, you can only have one at any given time. And it will stay wherever you put it until you create the next one. So oftentimes, before a boss fight, there'll be a place to put one of your temporary checkpoints. But the game is actually fairly liberal with where the areas are to place these. And to be clear, you don't have to place one anywhere if you don't want to. But some of the locations that are available to you are just confusing, as oftentimes you'll find places to put these checkpoints that are immediately next to one of the permanent checkpoints. Like right here, for example. And these areas where you can plant them aren't always spaced very far apart, and it's not as if there's something extremely dangerous between the two areas you could plant one. It just seems odd how many opportunities you have to create these temporary checkpoints. And each time you plant one of these things down, it does eat an item. So if you were intending to put one in every single location, and I don't know why you would do that, it could get very expensive, or require a lot of grinding on the same enemies to get them to drop. And the idea of having these temporary checkpoints is a great idea in concept, I just think the execution of them is flawed in this game. So is Lords of the Fallen worth your time and money? Well, if you've already played through everything From Software has to offer in the Souls department, then perhaps Lords of the Fallen 2023 is actually worth your time and money. But if you're not desperate for this kind of content, then I think you could seek better versions of this elsewhere. This game is a little too free with the cheap deaths, and I think it's free with the cheap deaths because you have the mechanic of going to the Umbral world upon dying. So if you're over a death pit, there's frequently enemies hidden that are just gonna push you into the death pit. And the first time that happens and you go to the Umbral world, it's like, okay, I see what they were doing there. But then they proceed to pull that trick at every single death pit, and it gets old. Also, I think it goes a little too over the top with some of the art style of the game. It kind of feels like a 3D version of Blasphemous in a lot of places, and that kind of art direction works for a little while, but then you just kind of grow numb to it. It stops being shocking or moving in any way. The actual Souls-like experience here isn't too bad. I just think $70 or even $60 is too much to pay. I'd wait for this to be more in the $30 to $40 range before slapping your money down. Please do subscribe, comment, like, and tell your friends.